Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but thanks for being here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just one more minute, but thanks for coming this afternoon. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Salata, and I am the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center. Before we begin, I wanted to mention that if you require closed captioning, there is an option to automate a live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom window, so please use that if needed. The Student Borrower Protection Center is a national nonprofit policy organization focused on alleviating the burden of student debt throughout the country through a mixture of advocacy, policymaking, and litigation strategy to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. On behalf of the Student Borrower Protection Center, thank you for joining our Student Debt in the South Texas report launch this afternoon. Today, we will be sharing insights from our report released today that details the state of student debt in 3 key Texas cities: Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. In addition, you'll hear from advocates working on student debt issues in the state of Texas. Now, I'd love to introduce our speakers for today's event. First, we'll have Mark Hulsman giving an overview of the report. Mark is a fellow of the Student Borrower Protection Center. He's also the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Hope Center at Temple University. Then we'll have Travis Evans. Travis Evans serves as the Southern Regional Director with Young Invincibles, residing in Houston, Texas. Young Invincibles' mission is to amplify the voices of young adults, ages 18 to 34 years old, in the political process and expand economic opportunity for our generation. He has an impressive track record in several specialized areas and brings years of experience supporting national nonprofit organizations with a focus on early childhood education, school-age programs, youth and young adult development, social emotional support, health wellness, and education programs in over 7 states. Then we'll hear from Jessie Stafford. Jessie Stafford is a senior research analyst at Texas Appleseed, whose mission is to promote social, economic, and racial justice for all Texans. She is passionate about using data to inform practical policy solutions to systemic problems and promote equity in both K-12 and post-secondary education. Finally, we will have a Q&A session with the speakers. If you have any questions throughout the event, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your Zoom window to ask any questions, and we will get to as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end. This event is also being recorded, and it will be available after the event. We'll also share a link to the recording in a follow-up email after this event ends. Okay, without further ado, I will pass it along to Mark to share an overview of the SBPC Student Debt in the South Texas report. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Amy. And as I share my screen, hopefully, because that would be a disaster if I couldn't do that. Y'all just see me talking instead of having great slides. Honored to be here with both Jessie and Travis today. Always love talking about this stuff with folks who are doing amazing organizing with borrowers, students, young folks across the country. So I think I got it. So as Amy mentioned, my name is Mark Hulsman. I'm a fellow. I'm here in my capacity as a fellow at the Student Borrower Protection Center. I'm also the director of policy and advocacy at the Hope Center at Temple University. I feel honored today to be sharing the findings of this report. I was just one cog among many amazing folks at SBPC and our partners who have contributed to this report and the series that SBPC is continuing to launch around student debt in the South. So for those who haven't checked out the first report in the series on Atlanta that came out last year, it's really amazing, very timely. And so this is an extension of that report that focuses, as Amy said, on 3 areas in Texas: the Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio areas. So I'm going to run through the findings probably too quickly, admittedly. There's some great stuff in this report. We think a lot of really amazing data points on the growth of student debt across these areas and experiences with borrower distress. So I'm only going to give you a little snapshot of the snapshot today, but hopefully folks can check out the website or check out the report on protectborrowers.org and read through it. So just very quickly about the report and about the data. The data uses, or the report uses data from the University of California Consumer Credit Panel, which is a nationally representative sample of credit records of U.S. adult consumers with a credit score. SBPC leverages this data in partnership with the Student Loan Law Initiative at the University of California. So amazing partners and an amazing sort of rich data set we can pull from. We looked at data from 2010 to 2022, which is quite fascinating in the student loan debt conversation, if you think about it. So we're looking at data from the Great Recession and sort of the aftermath of the Great Recession, all the way through the COVID-19 pandemic and the payment pause, right? So these moments of sort of the explosion in student debt that we saw in the early 2010s, all the way through the moment where really big federal interventions were put forward to pause and reduce the burden, right? So it's really interesting from that perspective. And really the goal of these reports is to better understand the intersection between race and student loan debt across the South. So this report and the Atlanta report before it explores things like total balances, average balances, and several measures of borrower distress on a neighborhood level, comparing majority white, majority Black, and majority Latino zip codes, in this case, Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. So we can get a really granular look at the different experiences across sort of communities of color as we define them. So just before I get into the findings, and again, I'm going to go super quick through the findings, I think it's probably important to start this conversation with a little bit of a why and a little bit of a root cause analysis of why we see a lot of rising student loan debt in Texas. And the first place I like to start in this conversation is telling the story of higher education disinvestment. So disinvestment in a public good. And Texas is not unique to other states, although Texas, likes to think of itself as unique. It has experienced things that many other states, particularly in the South, but not exclusively, have experienced across the past several decades, which is just a pullback from public investment in public higher education. So since 1990, we've seen a 15% decline in per student investment in Texas higher ed appropriations. Texas currently spends about $2,000 less per student than the national average in terms of public higher ed funding. And what's happened, right? More revenue from public institutions has come from tuition and not public resources and public dollars. So back in the early 80s, the vast majority of the cost of educating a student was made up by public funding, over 80%, and now it's about half and half. So you can quibble with the idea of whether public college is even a public good anymore in Texas and other states. So more funding from tuition and on the backs of borrowers, students, and families, less from public dollars. So as that happens, you see predictable consequences, right? You see more than a doubling of tuition at both public 2-year and public 4-year colleges in Texas. The state does not do a particularly good job of mitigating those costs with more grant aid to students. Texas spends $500 less than the national per student average in-state grant aid. So again, it's not, I'm not great at math, but when it comes to it, you have less public or fewer public dollars coming in, rising tuition, less state grant aid, you're going to see an explosion in costs borne by borrowers, students, and families themselves. But as we know, and I think this is particularly acute in many cities in Texas, the story of rising student loan debt does not stop at higher ed and tuition conversations, right? We've seen in several cities a pretty big rise in the cost of living. So just a couple of data points that we like to point to. If you look at folks who rent across these 3 cities in Texas, over 50% of renters in Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio are cost burdened, right? Which by definition means they're spending more than 30% of their income on monthly rent. So money has to come from somewhere. Most renters rather, are facing pretty extreme cost burdens in just meeting their living costs. If they're trying to save for an education, if they're trying to pay tuition out of pocket, if they're trying to meet the total cost of attendance of higher ed, they're going to have to turn to loans, right? Because sort of living costs are taking up such a chunk of their budgets. Other areas where we've seen real burdens placed on families, again, particularly in Texas, but not exclusively in Texas, is childcare costs. So across these 3 cities, again, average annual childcare costs hover between $17,000 and $18,000. So for the 1 in 5 undergraduates who are parenting students who have a dependent child of their own, that's yet another enormous cost that they have to meet somehow while being enrolled in school. So that's, again, another piece of the puzzle for why we see rising debt in Texas and across the country. And then finally, we can't talk about rising debt in Texas without talking about racial wealth inequality. So again, there's about 1 million stats you can pull from to show the sort of deep historical and often intentional inequities across the Texas economy as you see by race. Particularly among Black and Latino households. But here's just a few. Again, like housing wealth is a key driver of racial wealth inequality. The way that most families build up wealth and thus are able to prevent having to take on student debt for themselves or their family is through greater housing wealth. Well, in many markets in Texas, again, as across the country, we've seen an intentional locking out of Black and brown families from housing. So in Dallas, Black households make up about 1/4 of the population, but only 7% of the housing. In Houston, you see communities of color account for almost 3/4 of the population, but hold less than 4/10 of the primary residence housing wealth. If you look at small business ownership or medium-sized business ownership, you see a severe underrepresentation in San Antonio among communities of color in medium-sized business ownership, right? That's tends to be not the only avenues, but some of the main avenues that wealth is generated, and again, prevent people from borrowing or make it so people are able to pay off student debt in a meaningful and easy and short time frame. So that's just sort of a level-setting conversation before we get into the findings, which again, I'm previewing this because I'm going to run through it very quickly. We see exploding student loan debt across all 3 of these metropolitan areas in the 2010s and up until the pandemic payment pause. So just a few that I like to point out here. And again, please check out the report for more little nuggets and bites here. But total student loan debt in Dallas, jumped pretty considerably over the time period we looked at. Average and median balances, average balances, I should say, increased from a little under $20,000 to about $35,000. And again, if you take a racial equity lens and look at sort of rates of borrower distress, so rates of delinquency on student loans, derogatory rates, which is sort of delinquency plus other negative outcomes, defaults, charge-offs, things like that, you see those rates hover consistently high through the 2010s, even as the economy in Dallas was, frankly doing, on a macro scale pretty decently, right? You see derogatory rates on student loans hover consistently between 40 and 45% in majority Black neighborhoods in Texas up until the payment pause, right? Which we see the really huge impact of the student loan payment pause on rates of borrower distress, which I think we can't underestimate the power that had in actually reversing trends that had been stubbornly persistent for a long time. Houston, very similar story. We saw average student loan debt per borrower increase substantially, and even more in majority Black neighborhoods. Majority Latino neighborhoods, average student debt grew considerably. And then we looked at these measures across all three cities. But in Houston, what was sort of striking was in majority Black neighborhoods, we saw a substantial increase in the number of non-declining balances. So, derogatory, looking at measures of borrower distress like delinquency and things like that. That shows sort of some of the worst outcomes that borrowers can face. But another outcome the borrowers can face that we see consistently, particularly in Houston, is non-declining balances. So by the time our sort of analysis ends, non-declining balances, so the balances where borrowers are not making principal payments that are just running up and up and up and growing, even though they're making payments, non-declining balances account for an estimated 1 in 7 student loans held by Houston borrowers. So that's a substantial amount of debt that is where folks are unable to sort of make a dent in the principal balance. And we know from research and talking to borrowers and common sense, frankly, that can have profound psychological and financial impacts on borrowers if they're paying student debt and unable to see the balance go down. Right. This is something that the Biden administration has pointed to as a major flaw in our student loan system and the way we repay student loans. So again, this is something that in Black neighborhoods in Houston, but across all 3 cities, frankly, we see acutely and persistently. And then San Antonio, I told you I was going to go fast with this because I want to get to the partners. In San Antonio, again, very similar stories. Total student loan debt grew by 116% over this time period. And where we see in San Antonio is average balances grew at a faster rate in majority Latino neighborhoods than majority white neighborhoods. And delinquency rates and other measures of distress were persistently high along majority Latino zip codes in San Antonio. And one area, again, we look at this for all 3 cities, but one area that was really striking, I think, in San Antonio was there was a persistent growth in high balance borrowers. So this is obviously related to the conversation around non-declining balances. This is related to the conversation around borrowers making payments but seeing runaway debt and the sort of features of our system that perpetuate that. But throughout the decade that we looked at, the percentage of Latino borrowers with low balances shrunk. So the percentage of borrowers with less than $10,000 used to make up about 2/3 of borrowers in Latino communities, and then it shrunk considerably by 2021, or that should say 2021. That's a typo in the presentation. Whereas on the other end, the percentage of borrowers with high balances, right, so greater than $50,000, greater than $100,000, we see that nearly triple over time. So the mix of student loan borrowers increase, is whereas it's primarily low balance borrowers, particularly in majority Latino neighborhoods in San Antonio earlier in the decade, that shifts considerably where the typical or the modal student debt borrower has more and more debt to pay off. So again, those are just some highlights of the findings. We're happy to sort of share some other key findings as we find them offline, but I think there's a lot of data here to mine, but it all runs in the same direction, right? Which is that we saw a persistent rise, particularly among households or neighborhoods of color, I should say, in the 3 cities we looked at. It looked a little different in each city, obviously, given the sort of unique experience of folks there, but it all kind of ran in the same direction. We also saw that, again, in terms of rates of borrower distress, the student loan payment pause in early 2020 brought borrower distress to historic lows across Texas cities, right? It was persistent in terms of delinquency and other measures that we look at throughout the 2010s, kind of regardless of what was happening in the broader economy. But once the student loan payment pause hits, you see far lower delinquency rates, far lower rates of struggle, which can have a huge impact on borrowers' credits, on their financial lives, on their ability to sort of get ahead in the world. But despite that, despite the payment pause, we still saw a huge increase in runaway balances across all three cities, which sort of highlights the need not just to pause student loan payments, but to have a bold set of policies, including student loan debt cancellation and a student loan system that isn't broken, that ensures borrowers aren't repaying debt for decades, right? So, and again, just I think a plug for something that I think we think about a lot here, but just the need for holistic solutions across the state and across the nation that center the experiences of Black and Brown borrowers across the country, understand that student debt is a difference, a considerable difference in kind for borrowers of color often, and that the need to have bold policies that reform our broken loan student loan system, that reaffirm our commitment to public goods and the safety net, that reinvest in higher education for the most diverse generation of Texans and Americans that we've ever seen, is hugely important if we plan on reversing any of these trends. So with that, I'm going to turn it, I think, to Amy, and she'll turn it to Travis, I think is the run of show here.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate all of your insights. Next, we'll have Travis Evans from Young Invincibles. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Travis. Take it away.
Yes, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Student Borrowers Protection, for thinking of Young Invincible to be a part of this conversation. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Travis Evans. I serve as the Southern Regional Director with Young Invincibles. And here at Young Invincibles, we work to improve economic opportunity for young adults, the ages of 18 to 34, and ensure that they are involved in every part of the political process. And so we aim to create policies for young people, by young people always. And with workforce and higher education being one of our issue areas and some of our priorities, it's so befitting for us to be here. In my role, I help strategize our policy and advocacy and young adult engagement in our Southern region, specifically here in Austin, Houston, and East Texas, which a majority would deem as more of the rural area for us. We want to hear young adults' rural perspectives, and so we do focus in that area as well. And I've seen firsthand the crushing weight of student debt in our advocates and our work and young adults we engage with statewide. As we continue to explore our different tactics, learn from young adults, we tend to learn so much statewide, about this student debt being an issue in the South. So it's a stark reality that student loans, once seen as a pathway to like the American dream, is now become a, economic barrier and the financial freedom for young adults it's become very challenging. There were, opportunities where young adults were encouraged to pursue higher education as a means for having a brighter future. Only now we find them trapped in the cycle of this large amount of debt, which is very, very, very alarming for us. And then when we think about Texas, it's known as a state that's very diverse. We have so many vibrant communities. And now we're grappling with the suffocating effect of the student loan debt. And so there are a number, the numbers, speak for themselves. There are nearly 4 million borrowers with a significant amount of debt. And a majority of those borrowers are under the age of 35, and they're living in this debt, years and years and years, and for generations to come. And these are, not just statistics, but these are real people. These are young adults. These are friends. These are family members. These are future leaders. And those who, really dream to, live this American dream, and they're just suffocating because of this crisis. In this report, it highlights the imperative need to find solutions for student debt relief and with urgency. So, the debt rates continue to rise and soar in Texas, and particularly during the 2010s, we continue to see, this exacerbated by the pandemic even. Nearly all of the Latina student borrowers and a quarter of all Black student loan borrowers, we would have seen entirely a increase in balance in their student loan balance is erased with Biden's 2022 debt relief plan, if you dig deeper into this report. And the overturn of Biden's debt relief plan dramatically push back progress for student loan debt relief. And it really continues to impact young adults negatively, not just here in Texas, but worldwide. And so, that's very concerning for us. So far too long, student debt has exacerbated racial and economic inequities, particularly when we zoom in and look at our marginalized communities, especially Black students who are disproportionately, suffering from higher rates of borrowing for college. They're getting larger loans on an average. They're getting worse repayment, delinquency, defaults rates. It's just an ongoing thing, and we tend to see, that student debt, federal student debt for student tuition tend to increase. And then when we think about the pandemic has only made, these injustice worse for those communities, and cancellation even more necessary for student loan borrowers. This is exceptionally true in the South, with Texas being an example of student loan debt disparities and economic distress for those borrowers of color. So with this, burden and the results of young adults having to delay, those milestones such as getting married, purchasing homes, starting families, Hispanic and Latino borrowers were the most likely to delay getting married and having children due to student loan debt, which is, really concerning. For myself, being a first-generation college student, I can recall, my parents did not go to college, but they wanted me to be successful. In addition to myself, they were raising two additional children. They were young parents, having to cover bills, working, low-paying job. They lacked transportation, and they just really struggled to figure out how they were going to pay for college for myself. And so I had to apply for student loans. I had to get that job to offset the cost. And I recognized that, that was the only way for me to prove that I was the family rock star, but not knowing that I was suffering in this debt, over this 4-year period. I attended a university where there were limited scholarships and programs like majority of the young adults, that we interacted with daily. This university wasn't providing us with consumer ed opportunities to learn about ways to offset this debt or get some type of relief, not only to myself as a young student, but they weren't providing that information or knowledge to parents either. So, even at this point in my life, I even considered, dropping out because I knew that there was, this financial burden that came along with it. And I'm sure a lot of students that, today are thinking the same way. But thankfully, I was, able to graduate, and I can say with a large amount of debt, which, delayed me, purchasing a home and thinking about other milestones in my life. But thankfully, I was able to, secure a career and thinking about going into public service. I was able to go through the public service loan program where my loans were forgiven, and I was able to, be relieved of that debt and continue to work in public service. But, it delayed a lot of life happiness due to the debt. And so my story is similar to a lot of young borrowers. And I can also recall David, who was a part of our program, who, who graduated. He entered into this repayment. And David, says despite of, his determination and tireless efforts, he's found himself, ensnared in a web of financial hardship. It weighed down on him, the burden of student debt. And he was just thinking, how could I, as a college student, dare dream of success when the cost of education left me, in these shackles, and I was unable to pursue my aspirations freely. And it really felt like his dream was just slipping away from him, thinking you were going to go to college and land this degree and, just work the job that you love. But, there was this debt that came along with it. And it was a harsh reality for him every day, just juggling multiple jobs just to make those ends meet, and struggling even to think about his basic necessities, from rent to childcare to food and, healthcare costs. And as a result of this ongoing crisis and repayment, these young adults, and those from like the middle and low income class communities are forced to really make these decisions on what, can I afford to continue, what can I afford? How can I continue to make these payments? Do I scale back on groceries? Do I not go out with my friends and have this social, life or social activities and interaction with other? Do I pick up a second job, an additional shift? It becomes very, very challenging for young adults. So, I mean, this hardship associated with student debt, crisis continues with young adults as they enter repayment and trying to build, their stable lives with families. And millions of these borrowers were promised relief, and yet they remain in burdens with these monthly payments and wondering, do I, think about those necessities or pay these loan and this looming threat of the student loan debt. But we can't give up on finding a solution. We are appreciative of the students in Texas who also believe in student debt cancellation. One of our our young adults and advocates, Jada Sanford, spent months serving as a negotiator to support our Biden-Harris administration with developing some alternative plans. And we're grateful for the hard work that our young adults are putting into this, like Jada. And it played a pivotal role in shaping, how we tackle the student debt crisis. Jada mentioned that student loans are consuming, and they are continuing to prevent young adults like herself from being able to achieve financial freedom. She shared that we're drowning in this monthly payment. She sees no relief in sight, but the Department of Education must find a route to cancel and relieve young adults of this debt. But we are, grateful for all of the work that our young adults are putting in, and we're grateful for the Biden administration and the Department of Ed's attempts to deliver on their promises of student loan debt cancellation, while also improving our current payment plan system. But there is still so much work to be done. But we're glad that our organizations like ours, youth-led organizations, are putting in all the hard work to really keep higher education, student loan debt in the forefront and really help us, create these policies, these repayment plans, and opportunity for young adults to mobilize and really tackle this issue. There is still so much work to be done. So, Amy, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Thank you so much, Travis. Thanks for sharing more about YI's work and about your personal experience with student debt to really help paint a more vibrant picture of the context in Texas. We really appreciate you being here today. Okay, amazing. So now we'd love to turn it over to Jesse. Take it away, Jesse. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, let me get this going. So hi, I'm Jessie Stafford. I'm a senior research analyst at Texas Appleseed. And first, I want to thank the Student Borrower Protection Center for having me here today and bringing this important work to our state. Also, Mark and Travis, thank you so much for sharing. I feel honored to be alongside y'all. So a little bit about Texas Appleseed. We are a data-driven nonprofit committed to promoting social, economic, and racial justice for all Texans. And we work to identify practical solutions to difficult systemic problems. So what does Texas Appleseed do? We work across 5 primary project areas: criminal justice, disaster recovery and fair housing, education justice, fair financial services, youth justice, and youth homelessness. So only recently we began tapping into higher ed. Our criminal justice team is doing amazing work to ensure that higher education is accessible in prisons. And we've been working on trying to get Texas to ban transcript withholding for unpaid debt. And that's what I'm going to be talking about with y'all today. So back in March, I published a report, Withholding Higher Education, How Current Transcript Policies at Texas Colleges Derail Educational Aspirations and Job Opportunities for Texas. Texans, yeah, that's a mouthful, and I will drop that in the chat when I get done speaking. So yeah, let's go into it. So a little bit, I'm going to go into why we did this, what did we find, what were our challenges, and of course the data analysis, and then yeah, what are we trying to accomplish going from here? Okay, so transcript withholding, what's going on? So the Texas Education Code permits Texas colleges and universities to withhold the release of students or former students' college transcripts if they have an unpaid debt to the institution. Now we know that college transcripts provide proof of credit for completed courses at higher education institutions. So why is this a problem, right? So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Texans who hold a bachelor's degree earn about 43% more than individuals who hold an associate's degree, and about 68% more than high school graduates with no further education. So accessing a transcript is crucial for upward mobility for all individuals. So current students, transcripts must be provided if a student wishes to transfer to another higher education institution. Former students. So we know that many people must take a break in their education for various reasons. And if they wish to return to school, which if they wish to return to school and maintain credit for courses they've already completed, they're going to need to provide a transcript to the institution. And this is even impacting graduates, right? Jobs are starting to require a copy of the college transcript in the application process. So my big point here is this is impacting everybody. Okay, so this is ineffective and harmful. I'm going to try to paint this picture for y'all, right? So this is ineffective as a means of debt collection. So the practice doesn't work. Only an estimated 7 cents on the dollar of debts leading to transcript holds is actually collected. Okay, so it's ineffective at collecting debt, but it's very effective at holding students back, right? The CFPB, found that institutions took unreasonable advantage of the critical importance of these transcripts. Many students need these, right? They need them for upward mobility, to further their higher educational opportunities. And these consequences is disproportionate to the underlying debt amount. Okay, so the report, fun stuff here. Okay, so we wrote this to really just investigate how transcript withholding is impacting Texans, right? We know that 12 other states have already banned or partially banned this practice, and we want to see if Texas could do the same. So I'm sure many of you know that on July 1st, new federal rules will go into effect that will prevent institutions from withholding transcripts, but only for terms in which a student received federal financial aid and the balance of the term is paid in full. So this does not ban the practice of transcript withholding. Challenges. Okay, so we got into a lot of issues with data collection. We started, our original plan was to sample colleges and universities. We sent data requests via the Public Information Act to 6 community colleges and 6 universities across Texas. However, accessing data was a challenge. The data we received was inconsistent, and in most cases, I think all actually, our request was only partially fulfilled. And so due to these challenges, the extent of these challenges, we ended up excluding universities from the analysis and focused on the community colleges in our report. So our sampled colleges, here's 6. How do we choose these? We wanted geographical diversity. We wanted a mix of rural and urban schools. We wanted schools with high enrollment and low enrollment. And so we ended on these 6. Okay, our findings. So first of all, we asked these institutions about their policies regarding transcript holds. Remember that colleges are not obligated to implement this policy. The Texas Education Code leaves that up to each institution, and they can do it if and how they choose. So, yeah, we found that Dallas College only places holds on transcripts if the debt is 250 or greater, showing that, you know, there's a little bit of wiggle room here if institutions choose to go that route. But the other 5 colleges place holds on transcripts for any amount of debt. Okay, some top line findings. This is all 6 colleges combined. There were more than 55,000 debts, nearly $32 million in debt. Average debt was about $580 and the median was about $400. And remember, this is just debts that lead to transcript holds. Okay, and then disproportionate impacts. I really want to highlight 3 points here. So, number one, most debts belong to individuals who are no longer enrolled in the institution. 2, transcript withholding policies disproportionately harm Black students. And then I chose the threshold of 5 years, and most debts are older than 5 years, which further highlighting my point that this just isn't accomplishing the goal that they think it's going to accomplish. Okay, so categories of debt. What kinds, I keep talking about these debts. What are these debts, right? So it could be anything, basically anything that results in an outstanding balance on a student's account. Library fees, parking tickets, even a meal account. Student went and, charged a meal to their school account. Bam, you can't get your transcript until all of this is paid. Okay, so overview, I've already touched a bit on some top line findings. There are about 55,000 debts, 32 million. Now keep in mind, these are debts and not individuals. Some individuals could have more than one debt. So again, the average across these schools was about 580, and the median was about 400. The point here is that a $400 or $500 debt is not really a substantial amount to the institution. However, that is definitely sufficient to be a barrier to someone who wishes to access their transcript. Okay, and these are total debts held by enrollment status. The report, which I'll drop, also breaks all of this down into total debts and total amount of debt. But looking at total debts held by enrollment status, we're seeing that about 83% belongs to individuals no longer enrolled in the institution. So due to data issues, Blend gave us enrollment status in 3 categories: currently enrolled, graduated, or neither enrolled nor graduated, not attending. So here that 83% is just students who are not enrolled. We don't know if they graduated. We don't know if they didn't. However, due to Blend's fulfillment of the data request, they had about 91%. I think 92% is all non-enrolled, and 91% out of the total are students who fall in neither category of graduating or being enrolled. So most of these is individuals who, probably most need their transcript if they wish to return to school. Okay, racial disparities. So about 24%, first of all, we used publicly available data to get enrollment demographics at each of these institutions. Now note that it's impossible to know the exact enrollment at each debt at each time each hold was placed. So it was about 24% on average across these schools of students who are Black that are impacted by transcript holds, but only about 10% of individuals enrolled in these institutions are Black. And I just want to highlight that centuries of structural racism has led to a racial wealth gap. And Mark talked about it, Travis talked about it. And we know that about 86% of Black students must take out student debt compared to 68, had to check, 68% of white students, right? And so this continues over to transcript holds. This is disproportionately harming Black students. And then finally, as I mentioned, the age of debt, older than 5 years, over half, 58%, and really Sanjak has really low, is skewing the data. So in most cases, more than 58% of debts are old, which hammering in to the point that why are we continuing this practice whenever it's not even obtaining the goal of the institution to collect debt? It's just harming individuals. So this brings us to our policy recommendations. Recommendation 1 is super simple and very straightforward. We are advocating for a complete ban on this practice. We'll be working on that over the next year. In the legislative session, we are really pushing for a complete ban. That's simple. And then number 2, obviously with all our issues in data collection, we need transparent data reporting. So we'll be pushing Texas to require yeah, consistent, standardized data reporting so we can get a true look into like how deep this issue impacts Texans. So recap, 3 big things. You'll hear me say it all one more time. Number 1, colleges and universities withholding students and former students' transcripts, ineffective at collecting debt, effective at holding individuals back. Second, the disproportionate impacts. These are individuals who aren't enrolled in the institution and need their college transcripts. This is disproportionately harming Black individuals, and these debts are not being collected. They're old. And finally, the only thing you need to remember today, we are calling on Texas to ban this practice. So thank you all so much. I will drop the report link in the chat and I will turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you so much, Jesse. We really appreciate you talking more about Texas Appleseed's work and highlighting another kind of facet of the student loan system that many people don't think of as student debt, but of course, institutional debt is also an area on which we work. Amazing. Okay, so I think we have some time for questions now. And so I'll kick us off with one of our questions. So this, our SPPC report details many of the issues happening in Texas, but it also falls in line with national trends in many cases, which can paint a pretty dire picture for folks. So I'm wondering, what are some things that give you hope related to the student loan system these days? And anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in here. I think what gives us hope is that one, young adults on our end are very passionate about this, and they understand the burdens that come with it. And so, we must, continue to think about the broad debt cancellation, and President Biden, holding our alleged members accountable for keeping their promises around, canceling student debt, understanding the realities of young adults, their lived experiences, and thinking about the alternative legal strategies that Biden can pursue. And we can get, through this next round of negotiating making, and we can see, sustainable forgiveness. And additionally, we need to attack, college affordability at the root, and, thinking about the debt-free pathways and affordable education. While we are focusing on the student debt student debt problems in, the 4-year degrees and graduate program, student debt is a burden for many types of program past high school. So the post-secondary education is really necessary for creating, a strong and skilled workforce. And we should not be punishing people with debt to be able to, really pursue their dreams.
Yeah, I think, Travis's point about, this being an animating issue for young folks and households across the country, right, I think is what gives me hope. I mean, you cannot be a serious policymaker at the state or federal level anymore and ignore this issue. And I think that wasn't true 10 years ago. And that's thanks to the organizing and the advocacy and the tireless work, again, for folks who are organizing on the ground in states and communities, for those who are doing the work of organizing for racial justice and putting this at the center of it, right? Given the data tells the story, right, about this as part and parcel and cause and consequence of the racial wealth gap and racial wealth inequality, but it takes folks lifting up their voices and their experiences to make sure that policymakers aren't ignoring it, right? So, and I take hope from the fact that, like, after a, extremely flawed Supreme Court decision that blocked the first pathway for debt cancellation, advocates did not let the Biden administration ignore the issue. It was full steam ahead and having an alternate route, as Travis alluded to, on student debt cancellation, and making sure that those who are experiencing financial hardship, which we know overlaps deeply by race in this country, have the most robust pathway to relief, right? So that gives me hope. I think that there's lots of organizing that can be done at the state level on, as Travis mentioned, college affordability, on making sure we're reinvesting in public goods, that we're getting our hands around all of the costs that that manifest into student debt, right? That it's not just tuition and fees, that it's all of the things and financial burdens facing families that end up, routing them into having to borrow and repay debt for decades. But again, it's something, the genie's out of the bottle. I don't know the mixed metaphor to use here, but I don't think it can be ignored, and I think that's cause for hope in the future.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, we have another question here. So what makes Texas a unique state to organize around these issues, or are there any lessons learned for other advocates working in other states on student debt work?
I'm going to leave it to the Texans.
Yeah, I would say Texas, it's difficult here. Yeah, it's difficult here to really bring issues around debt in general to the Texas legislator. There's a lot of pushback. And so I think that's definitely, something very particular about here. But I think it encourages us to find unique solutions and unique ways to go about our advocacy. And I know we work on a lot of other debt collection issues at Texas Appleseed, and we have been able to move things forward. And so for me, like going back to hope as well, that is hope that with this student debt, crisis, essentially, that we can keep moving forward and keep pushing forward. And I think another thing too is Texas is just so big. So it's such a big, it's a big portion of the issue. And so I think that's why I'm so thankful y'all are looking into us here, and for your report. So yeah, I think, Texas is big. We're pretty representative. We're a good little case study of the bigger issue as well. And, we're very diverse. So you're seeing all that show up, and just finding creative ways to move this issue forward.
Yeah, I'll add to that. We're pretty, unique in the way that, we advocate for student debt, for several reasons. We're right behind California in terms of, borrowers and, the debt that comes along with it. When we think about, the U.S. Department of Education report, Texans are like the second highest for student debt. And, the initial, student debt forgiveness plan from Biden, which was overturned by SCOTUS, we would offer, forgiveness to like 1.4 million Texans. And as you can see in this report, it's an extremely diverse state with a number of borrowers. And we, can increase, and we've increased in the last decade and continue to grow, which makes us that case study, like Jesse was saying there. And we've seen other states like California who have been successful in, passing legislation and incorporating, state tax exemption for student debt cancellation. And, at this time, including Biden's one-time cancellation, and a host of debt forgiveness programs. So Texas is pretty unique.
Thank you both. That's really helpful. We have another question here about what we found to be the reasons behind the runaway debt that we cite in our report. Like, is it just increasing tuition, or is there also an increase in people attending colleges, or increasing challenges in repayment? So what would we just describe as like the chief issue there? I think this is a question mostly for Mark. Yeah.
Sure. So that's a really good question, and we can't say for certainty why. There's a number of reasons why you might see runaway balances, or folks not making principal payments. Some of them pernicious, and some of them, I don't want to say benign, but sort of there can be other reasons for it. I mean, from what we know, right, the rising cost of living, the squeeze that households have been facing in particularly urban areas across the country with regard to living costs, childcare costs. wage stagnation, everything else, make it so that the people are not making additional payments on their student loan principal, right? A related issue is the rise of income-driven repayment, which is not a bad thing on its face, but as more borrowers enroll in income-driven repayment, many of the features of IDR plans and in federal loans made it so that interest could capitalize, that it could, you could have negative amortization and have runaway balances. Even if you were making your monthly payment, you'd see your balance grow. So I mentioned this sort of very, very much in passing, but the Biden administration has recognized this in their design of their new SAVE plan, their new income-driven repayment plan, understanding that runaway balances were an incredibly common occurrence in IDR plans, right? Someone is enrolling in an affordable, quote unquote, affordable monthly payment plan, but what they're experiencing is, it may be eligible for a $0 monthly payment, but they're seeing their balance grow and grow and grow. So the Biden administration has committed to canceling some, some or pausing accrued interest on their new SAVE plan. So this was a particularly common occurrence as we saw the growth of IDR in the 2000s, but I think it's also a feature of or a function of the fact that we saw massive increases in living costs and college costs and everything for folks.
Thanks so much, Mark. Okay, amazing. I think we are almost at time, so I'm wondering if we could maybe just end with, if you have any closing thoughts or feelings that maybe you want to share with the group here, that would be really helpful. So whoever wants to go first can kick us off.
I'll jump in there. I guess as I started, young people are speaking up. We had over 22,000, borrowers voice their support for student debt cancellation and comments. And they were submitted from, Young Invincibles, Student Borrowers Protection Center, NAACP, to the Federal Register in response to this 30-day public commenting period with Biden's administration notice around this rulemaking. And so, young adults are passionate, and we're seeing, them making waves there. We're putting, LEDGE members on notice, our communities on notice that student debt is an issue for us. So I just encourage organizations, young adults, everyone to just continue to speak up, because, it's not happening as fast as we want to, but it's happening in increments, and we're creating awareness. And, I think it's going to take us to continue, being the voice and putting ourselves out there to really share, how this affects us all.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that, it's individuals, it's organizations like my wonderful co-panelists on here who are making sure that we can't be ignored with this issue. The negotiated rulemaking, that's a start. It's getting other people in the conversation to try to move forward, our priorities. And it's in the forefront now, but we keep pushing back. Like when SCOTUS keeps pushing back, we keep pushing back. We keep pressing them. So yeah, we're moving along, and I have a hard time saying anything other than cancel the debt, but we're getting closer, just little by little. And so thank you to Travis and Mark and Amy and the rest of y'all for all the amazing work you're doing on this, and for this amazing opportunity to come and share and chat about this issue that's impacting so many people.
Thanks, and I thank you to Jesse and Travis and Amy and SBPC. I think my overarching thought in contributing to this report and being a part of this amazing work is that Texas matters. I mean, we know this in many ways, but in terms of the real persistent fights that we see that are very interconnected, right? The state, the state's flagship university was a defendant in the highest profile effort to do away with affirmative action and race conscious admissions, right? It's a microcosm of the broader shifts around addressing diversity, equity, inclusion in our education system, right? It's a microcosm of a drop in investing in public goods, right? So all the organizing and the amazing work that's being done on the ground in Texas, you know, is not lost on me in this discussion, and I think it's so important as a model and you know, a lesson for what's going on across the country, because there's so much here, as you see in the data, that's a microcosm of what we see elsewhere, and often previews what we see elsewhere. So that's why I was privileged to be a part of something that's shining a light on the very big and unwieldy issues facing borrowers in Texas. But I think it's really important to keep that going.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark, Travis, and Jesse for being here today. Thanks to everyone who joined this afternoon. We appreciate you coming. And we will be sending out the recording as soon as it's uploaded. But we appreciate you being here and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again.